Tennessee Life is sponsored by
Mid-South Sewing is an authorized brother dealer and repairs all brands of machines. Mid-South Sewing, known for their many fabrics, classes, and individual instructions. Classes on sewing and embroidery machines, software, sergers, and quilting. Mid-South Sewing, Knoxville and Murfreesboro.
Tennessee Life is also brought to you by Next to New, an upscale consignment shop serving Knoxville. nexttonewknox.com. And by The Flower Pot, for over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations. knoxvilleflowerpot.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Coming up on this edition of Tennessee Life, the Secret City. With so many stories yet to tell, this man wanted to share them in a book.
I kind of feel like I was just on the sidelines. In a lot of ways, my mantra when I was writing this book was get out of the way, because 90% of the book are quotes from oral histories that have been done over the last 30 years.
You may be familiar with the game of pool, but what about snooker? We visit a family business where people have gathered for this game since 1923.
We're the only room that has snooker tables in Knoxville. My oldest snooker table back in the back was my grandfather's.
His passion for capturing images of animals has taken him as far away as Africa and as close as his own backyard. Fountain City's Clay Thurston shares the stories behind some of his favorite shots.
I like all of my photos, or I probably wouldn't be out there taking them. But sometimes when I see something that I know everybody else is going to like too, that's when it makes a difference.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of Tennessee Life. I'm Vicki Lawson. Long before it was known as Oak Ridge, Tennessee, it truly was a secret city that wasn't even on a map. Even the people who lived there during the years of the Manhattan Project didn't know the impact they would have on history. Author Richard Cook talks with us about who he calls the ignored heroes. Richard Cook, thanks for being with us. You are the author of Ignored Heroes of World War II, the Manhattan Project Workers of Oak Ridge. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, I started poking around this story back in 2000 when I moved to Oak Ridge. My wife was born and raised there. I knew nothing about the story, and the more I got into it, the deeper it got. And the deeper it got, the more I got into it.
How did you put the accounts and interviews together? Tell me the process of putting this book together.
I kind of feel like I was just on the sidelines. In a lot of ways, my mantra when I was writing this book was get out of the way, because 90% of the book are quotes from oral histories that have been done over the last 30 years. And so I would go through these transcripts, about 70 of them, and I would just pull what I thought were good quotes. And as I did that, the form kind of showed itself. There were some obvious things. You had to start with the beginning and evicting the farmers, and you had to end with the bombing of Hiroshima. But in between, you just kind of discovered there were common themes in all these interviews. And so I just cut and pasted interviews and then sat down. It was like a big jigsaw puzzle and just tried to figure out what the common themes were. And so all of this stuff was online, and I did the entire book from my living room.
Your title reads Ignored Heroes, but long after the secret city is no longer secret, why do you think we were not aware of many of those stories?
Well, for 2 reasons. One is that there's still a shroud of secrecy over this story. The very important parts of this story, K-25 and Y-12, are behind security portals with guys with guns and razor wire. You can't get to it. But the other thing is that educators, and I think the media, have kind of pushed back on this story, because if I go to them and say, you need to do something about these Oak Ridge workers, and they go, well, now wait, you want us to honor bombing Hiroshima? And I go, no, I want to honor ending the war.
One of the parts of that was very interesting to me. Tell me about the childhood perspective.
That was one of the biggest surprises of the book, was people that were in their 60s and 70s and 80s giving oral histories about their time when they were small children in Oak Ridge. And they loved it. They felt like they were in a utopia. There were tons of programs that were sponsored by the city during the summertime. And so the kids could leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, go to an elementary school playground, and they had organized activities till noon. You'd disappear, go back home, have lunch, and then you were back there from 1 till about 5. And they had basketball leagues and baseball leagues and art classes and just all kinds of activities.
Tell me about the different type of housing people talked about in their interviews.
Well, the famous houses were called alphabet houses. And an A house was a 1-bedroom house, and a B house was a 2-bedroom, and a C house was a 3-bedroom. And you got housing based on how many kids you had and the genders of the kids. If you had all boys, you were out of luck. You weren't going to get a house with many bedrooms. I live in a C house right now, which is a 3-bedroom house. Part of the security issue was people in given parts of town, they all worked at the same place. So they all worked at K-25. And the Y-12 people were in another part of town because they didn't want those people intermingling socially because they were worried they would spill the beans about what they were doing at those respective sites. So in many ways, these people were segregated, although driving through the neighborhoods, you couldn't tell.
Did people talk about the great efforts taken for security back then?
You couldn't bring in firearms, cameras were banned, binoculars were banned. There's a whole chapter about alcohol being banned, and there was this whole cat and mouse game of sneaking liquor.
So it was very controlled what they allowed in. I mean, even in the households then.
Yes, everything was subject to security, and everybody accepted it. And it was amazing to me because nobody ever figured out what the purpose of the community was, as opposed to Los Alamos, where they had 2 Russian spies actually. But in Oak Ridge, they never figured it out. But there were 2 aspects of the project they couldn't keep secret, and that was the speed with which it was happening and the scale of it. And that was everywhere, and it made the town just absolutely electric because everybody knew whatever they were working on, it was really big and it was really fast.
What were some of the accounts of the social life and the fun things to do in the Secret City?
There were estimated that there were 8 times more women than men. So the men thought they had died and gone to dating heaven. And the women could be really picky. And dancing went on almost every night. The women talked about dancing a lot, and I think it might have been code for something else besides dancing, but that's how they talked about it. There were movie theaters everywhere, and movies only ran 2 days, and then they changed them out. There were dozens of baseball leagues, basketball leagues, hundreds of bridge clubs, all kinds of activities to keep them happy.
Do you have a favorite story or quote from your research?
Oh man, there are dozens of them, but there's one from Colleen Black, and but she was a real ham, and but she has a quote about community that I'll read to you. Oak Ridge had such a spirit back then. I hate to hear people say, you know how horrible it was? I mean, it was bad. It was bad all over, and I'm sure all over the country, but it wasn't as bad as being in a foxhole. But the spirit of Oak Ridge, we were all doing something to win the war, for the war effort, and I think it carried over, and we're still helping each other. And like that, if you weren't near your family, you just kind of adopted your neighbors and friends and church, and they were your family, and you got real close to all these people. And if you lived here that long, well, you're just like family.
You gave such a wonderful account from the historic perspective, but also through photography. Tell me about the pictures within your book and who did those.
So Ed Westcott was hired in November 1942 to be the official photographer for the Manhattan Project. And cameras were banned. So his record is the only record we have. And it's estimated that he took 20,000 photographs in 2.5 years. And at the end of the war, in August of 1945, he wasn't yet 24 years old. He created the most important photographic archive of 20th century American history before he was 24.
That was a tremendous job for a young man. And I mean, without him, the accounts of that and the stories of Oak Ridge would have always remained secret.
Yes. I mean, without Ed, there's no story. And without the oral histories, there are no stories. I mean, there was a real chance that this story could have just evaporated from the national memory because there was really no record of it, because it was secret. And so I'm hoping that this book helps fix this injustice of history to these workers. I mean, this is one of the great untold epic stories of American history.
Later on Tennessee Life, a look through the lens of nature photographer Clay Thurston as he shares some of his favorite animal experiences. But first, it may look like pool, but this game is called Snooker, and this table belonged to the man who opened the doors 90 years ago.
Step into McDonald's Billiard Supply Company and you'll find people gathering for a game of snooker or pool, just like they've done for decades. It's not a sports bar, no drinking allowed. It is also his showroom for selling high-quality tables. Owner Pat McDonald talks with us about this third-generation business.
Just a friendship with people you get to know over the years and play with regularly. Learn their game and they learn yours.
Met some good people in here. You know, it's just enjoyable. You can get away and enjoy yourself and let your hair down if you got hair. I play snooker, I guess. That's an old man's game, maybe.
Sometimes I talk about my place being a daycare for senior citizens, watching over them. And 80-year-old men argued each other. And there are several of them know when I was 12 and 13, 14. So, yeah, I grew up with them. They grew up, you know, older with me. So,
I've known Pat since he was a kid, and there's one thing I believe in is loyalty. And I'll be coming down here if they have to wheel me in a wheelchair down here, probably.
My name's Pat McDonald. I'm the owner of McDonald's Billiard Supply. We've been in the business over 90 years.
My grandfather, Joe McDonald, started. My dad took it over probably somewhere in the 1948, 1950 when he got back from the service. Back then, when Gay Street was alive and all this stuff, is a big place to go.
I think it's 413 on Gay Street. There was probably 5 or 6 rooms on Gay Street at one time. Every neighborhood had a pool room, just think that. That's gone to the wayside now.
A lot of young folks went up there. At one time, he had 9 pool tables and I think probably 3 snooker tables. They had a big board up on the wall that had game results. At that time, they were doing a little booking and that sort of thing. You know, a lot of the young men in South Knoxville, at South High School and Young High School, it's almost like a rite of passage to go through there.
I can remember the Gay Street location. I remember it was next to another pool hall, but I never did go in it. JD's, everybody I knew in South Knoxville went to the Bull's place. That was what everybody called him, the Bull.
When he moved out here, he changed it to McDonald's Billiard Supply. He wanted to get away from the sports in name of it. So everybody calls it a pool room, and as you play pool, that's the old time, but he always wanted it's a billiard supply. Raise it up one more level to be respectable. He had 3 snooker tables and 2 pool tables at one time. And the snooker was the biggest calling card for us back then.
You've got red balls and number balls, and of course you break out of an area up in the top of the table there, but you must make contact with a red ball first. Once you make a red ball, you can shoot any number ball on there. And then once all the red balls are gone, you go through the rotation of the number balls, and you keep track of the foul is 7 against you if you make a mislick or scratch, you know, they call it. And that's how you keep track of it. You have to learn how to add.
We're the only room that has snooker tables in Knoxville. My oldest snooker table back in the back was my grandfather's. I don't know what year he bought it. The other snooker table 1952, my dad bought that table for $825. That's from Brunswick, Bolton, Collender Company. And they come to Knoxville, set it up, and did everything. Pop paid $51 a month he got it paid for. And that was a lot of money for him, for anybody at that time. He didn't tolerate no nonsense, not one bit. And even uptown he didn't tolerate no nonsense.
No drinking and no cussing, no fighting. You'll get thrown out. When I first came down here and met Mr. McDonald, he was quite a character, you know. And I mean, he had his rules, and if you didn't abide by them, out that door you went, you know. I was down here one time when Big John Tate come in here, and he come in and said a few cuss words. He could whip anybody, and JD told him, "There's the door. Don't even look back." And I thought, that's Big John Tate, you know. And he meant every word of it, you know.
To play pool cost you $3.60 an hour per cue. So two of you is $7.20. Your snooker, I charge $2 a game. Two of you play snooker. The loser of the game will pay the rack. That's what they call the rack bet. I can remember when it didn't have it on time, it was 15 cents a game. My grandfather, when it went up from a dime to 12.5 cents, they gave you a token. Good to Joe McDonald's Sports Center. So when they give you 15 cents, you got that token back. That was your change. So then you get repeat customers in your business. 10 or 12 years ago, it was nothing to give on Saturday morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. It'd be 8 or 10 of them want to play pool. And it got so bad, we gave them a key to open up. I said, I'll give you the key, and I'll be here at 8 o'clock, but here's your key. And they marked the games down, did everything, and then they bring their lunch, and then they've gone by 1 o'clock. It's amazing. I mean, people say, you're crazy. I said, no, it happened. We sell tables, we move tables, we do supplies, we stay busy, you know, pretty much all the time. We're not going to sell everybody a table, but when they get a table from me, they've got a piece of furniture. Well, that ring was my grandfather's, and my daddy wore it. When he passed away, in his will says, whoever run the pool room got the ring. So it was handed down to him, it handed down to me. Every job we've ever done, either myself or my dad's been on it. I miss it. And I can look back there and see him back there. You think about all the years we've been in business, all the ups and downs, all the good times, bad times, whatever. It's not going to be perfect, but it's okay.
Capturing unique moments in time is the goal for nature and wildlife photographer Clay Thurston. While he has taken trips around the world to put his lens in front of exotic wildlife, he says some of his favorite shots come from his own Tennessee backyard.
I think my interest in photography probably went towards wildlife because so many other photographers were doing landscapes. I wanted to go out and do shows, art shows, and sell my photography. And if somebody walks into my booth and they tell themselves, well, I can do all this, you know, then I'm not going to sell much of my photography. So I had to do something that other people weren't doing. I'm trying to get more of the personality, and I think my biggest asset for wildlife photography is patience. You know, I can wait all day to get one shot. The ones that probably get the most attention is I have a shot of a chipmunk his head is just sticking out of a log, and it looks like he has a toothpick hanging out of his mouth. Cheeks are totally full because he has all these seeds in there. He stuffed his mouth full inside the log, and when he stuck his head out, he's trying to get rid of. You see his tongue, and you see what looks like a toothpick, but it's a pine needle that he's trying to kick out of his mouth with his tongue. I've got another shot of a bumblebee. It's a beautiful shot of a bumblebee, but if you look closer at the bumblebee, you realize that there's an insect like a mosquito on the back of the bumblebee. So that's something that people just kind of go into shock when they see. My favorite place to photograph landscapes is Cades Cove. I was in Cades Cove just photographing typically birds. So I had my large lens on. I was photographing on the edge of this field, and there were some horses behind me. I mean, I wasn't even paying any attention to the horses because they weren't doing anything too exciting when I first walked up. So I had turned around, I was photographing some birds in the trees, and then I turned back around and looked at the horses, and they were nuzzling and they were rubbing each other and just kissing all over. And I thought, oh my gosh, I am photographing the wrong thing. I need to be photographing these horses. And so I actually had to back up. I was shooting with a 600 millimeter lens at the time, and I was too close to the horses to get anything. So I had to back up real quickly and just started shooting. And it was just amazing. It was just so fun to watch. When you drive around Tennessee, you have some wonderful waterfalls. Bald River Falls down in Sweetwater is a great place to photograph any time of the year, even in the wintertime, if you can get in on the road. The things that I really, really enjoy is finding places that you don't really plan on going to. You just stumble by them. Case in point is one morning I was getting ready to go to church, and I had remembered the night before a blooming peach orchard that I had seen coming back from Nashville. And I thought, okay, I can get to this peach orchard, photograph it, and still make it to church. And so I went down to this peach orchard early in the morning. It was totally blooming and totally covered in fog all over it. So when I first got there, you could only see one or two trees. But I knew eventually it would clear. And so I sat there and waited and waited and waited, and I finally got pieces and parts of it. And my favorite shots are with a little bit of fog throughout the whole peach orchard. And it's one of my favorite landscapes of Tennessee for sure. And I still made it in time for church. By far my favorite place to photograph wildlife, though, has been Africa. I've been to Africa twice, spent 2 weeks in Kenya photographing on one trip, and then 3 weeks in Tanzania photographing on a separate trip. And they were both just absolutely amazing. I was fortunate enough to find several cheetahs. Cheetah is a hard animal to find in Africa. And that's been my favorite animal since I've been a tiny kid. Also, leopards. Leopards are really tough to find, in the wild in Africa. Both trips, I got some really nice shots of leopards. You get real concerned when you're photographing animals that are bigger than you are, or animals that can eat you. I've been to Alaska 3 times, and the only time that I've ever been terrified has been around grizzly bears. I turned around, put my camera in the van, got everything put away, turn around, and he's standing facing straight in front of me, probably 30 feet away. And I've never ever had adrenaline just go firing through my body like that before. And it was one of these fight or flight things. I said, should I dive into the car and be safe? Or should I get my camera out and take a picture? And finally, he realized that I wasn't any problem, and he just kind of hobbled along and went behind my van across the street and was gone. I started mostly photographing mammals because they were everywhere, and of course in Cades Cove, deer were just wonderful. And then I gradually worked into photographing birds. That has really become a challenge, and even today, I've probably been emphasizing birds the last 5 or 6 years. My backyard is probably my next favorite place. I spend more hours photographing in my backyard than any place else, even Cades Cove. And the thing that's so nice about that is you know what's going to be there. I feed the birds, I feed the animals all year long. So I have their attention. And then you just wait for the lighting to be right, wait for ice, wait for snow, wait for whatever you want for the situation. And then you start working the ones that are just right here. A lot of times I have people that want to know the story behind the photographs. And so I wind up telling a lot of stories. And when they find out that it is in my backyard sometimes, it's like, really? Because we live in the same neighborhood as you. And they're there. People aren't really looking and seeing what's going on. I like all of my photos, or I probably wouldn't be out there taking them. But sometimes when I see something that I know everybody else is going to like too, that's when it makes a difference. And you can always get a better photograph. You know, I think I have some that are really, really nice, but then I always know that it could be really, really nicer.
We hope you've enjoyed the history, pastimes, and wildlife we brought you on this edition of Tennessee Life. I'm Vicki Lawson. See you next time.
Tennessee Life is sponsored by
Mid-South Sewing is an authorized brother dealer and repairs all brands of machines. Mid-South Sewing, known for their many fabrics, classes, and individual instructions. Classes on sewing and embroidery machines, software, sergers, and quilting. Mid-South Sewing, Knoxville and Murfreesboro.
Tennessee Life is also brought to you by Next to New, an upscale consignment shop serving Knoxville. Next to new Knox.com. And by The Flower Pot, for over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations. KnoxvilleFlowerPot.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. A DVD of this program is available by visiting EastTennesseePBS.org.